Around Chapter 14. Mr. Willy Wonka. Mr. Wonka was standing all alone just inside the open gates of the factory. And what an extraordinary little man he was. He wore a black top hat on his head. He wore a tailcoat made of a beautiful plum-colored velvet. His trousers were bottle green. His gloves were pearly gray. And in one hand he carried a fine gold-topped walking cane. Covering his chin there was a small, neat, pointed black beard, a goatee, and his eyes were most marvelously bright. They seemed to be sparkling and twinkling at you all the time. The whole face, in fact, was alight with fun and laughter. And oh, how clever he looked! How quick and sharp and full of life! He kept making quick, jerky little movements with his head, cocking it this way and that, and taking everything in with those bright, twinkling eyes. He was like a squirrel in the quickness of his movements, like a quick, clever old squirrel from the park. Suddenly, he did a funny little skipping dance in the snow, where he spread his arms wide and he smiled at the 5 children who were clustered near the gates, and called out, "Welcome, my little friends! Welcome to the factory!" His voice was high and fluty. "Will you come forward one at a time, please?" he called out, "and bring your parents. Then show me your golden ticket. Give me your name. Who's first?" The fat boy stepped up. "I'm Augustus Gloop," he said. "Augustus!" cried Mr. Wonka, seizing his hand and pumping it up and down with terrific force. "My dear boy, how good to see you! Delighted, charmed, overjoyed to have you with us. And these are your parents? How nice! Come in, come in. That's right. Step to the gates." Mr. Wonka was clearly just as excited as everybody else. "My name," said the next child to go forward, "is Versa Salt." "My dear Versa, how do you do? What a pleasure this is. You do have an interesting name, don't you? I always thought that Versa was a sort of wart that you got on the sole of your foot. But I must be wrong, mustn't I? How pretty you look in that lovely mink coat. I'm so glad that you could come. Dear me, this is going to be such an exciting day. I do hope you enjoy it. I'm sure you will. I know you will. Your father? How are you, Mr. Salt? And Mrs. Salt? Overjoyed to see you. Yes, the ticket is quite in order. Please go in." The next 2 children, Violet Beauregard and Mike TV, came forward to have their tickets examined and then to have their arms practically pumped off their shoulders by the energetic Mr. Wonka. And last of all, a small, nervous voice whispered, "Charlie Bucket." "Charlie!" cried Mr. Wonka. "Well, well, well! So there you are. You're the one who found your ticket only yesterday, aren't you?" Yes, I read all about it in this morning papers. Just in time, my dear boy. I'm so glad, so happy for you. And this, your grandfather? Delighted to meet you, sir. Overjoyed, enraptured, enchanted. All right, excellent. Is everybody in now? 5 children? Yes, good. Now will you please follow me? Our tour is about to begin. But do keep together. Please don't wander off by yourselves. Oh, I shouldn't like to lose any of you at this stage of the procedure things. Oh dear me, no. Charlie glanced back over his shoulder and saw the great iron entrance gate slowly closing behind him. The crowds on the outside were still pushing and shouting. Charlie took one last look at them. Then, as the gates closed with a clang, all sight of the outside world disappeared. "Here we are!" cried Mr. Wonka, trotting along in front of the group. "Through this big red door, please. That's right. It's nice and warm inside. I have to keep it warm inside the factory because my workers are used to an extremely hot climate. They can't stand the cold. They'd perish if they went outdoors in this weather. They'd freeze to death." "But who are these workers?" asked Augustus Gloop. "All in good time, my dear boy," said Mr. Wonka, smiling at Augustus. Be patient. We shall see everything as we go along. Are all of you inside? Good. Would you mind closing the door? Thank you. Charlie Bucket found himself standing in a long corridor that stretched away in front of him as far as he could see. The corridor was so wide that a car could have easily been driven along it. The walls were pale pink. The lighting was soft and pleasant. How lovely and warm, whispered Charlie. I know, and what a marvelous smell, answered Grandpa Joe, taking a long, deep sniff. All of the wonderful smells in the world seemed to be mixed up in the air around them. The smell of roasting coffee and burnt sugar and melting chocolate and mint and violets and crushed hazelnuts and apple blossom and caramel and lemon peel. And far away in the distance, from the heart of the great factory, came a muffled roar of energy, as though some monstrous, gigantic machine was spinning its wheels at breakneck speed. Now this, my dear children, said Mr. Wonka, raising his voice above the noise. This is the main corridor. Would you please follow me in? That's the way. Good. Everybody ready? Come on then, here we go. He trotted off rapidly down the corridor with the tails of his plum-colored velvet coat flapping behind him, and the visitors all hurried after him. It was a large party of people when you came to think of it. There were 9 grown-ups and 5 children, 14 in all. So you can imagine that there was a great deal of pushing and shoving as they hustled and bustled down the passage, trying to keep up with the swift little figure in front of them. Come on, cried Mr. Wonka. Get a move on, please. We'll never get round today if you dawdle like this. Soon he turned right off the main corridor into another slightly narrower passage. Then he turned left, then left again, then right, then left, then right, then right, then left. The place was like a gigantic rabbit warren, with passages leading this way and that in every direction. Don't you let go of my hand, Charlie, whispered Grandpa Joe. Notice how all these passages are sloping downwards, called out Mr. Wonka. Now we are going underground. All the most important rooms in my factory are deep down below the surface. Why is that? Somebody asked. There won't be nearly enough space for them on the top, answered Mr. Wonka. These rooms we are going to see are ginormous. They're bigger than football fields. No building in the world will be big enough to house them. But down here, underneath the ground, I've got all the space I want. There's no limit, so long as I hollow it out. Then Mr. Wonka turned right. He turned left. He turned right again. The passages were sloping deeper and deeper downhill now. Then suddenly, Mr. Wonka stopped in front of him. There was a large, shiny metal door. The party crowded round. On the door, in large letters, it said, The Chocolate Room. Chapter 15, The Chocolate Room. An important room, this, cried Mr. Wonka, taking a bunch of keys from his pocket and slipping one of them into the keyhole of the door. This is the nerve center of the whole factory, the heart of the whole business, and so beautiful. I insist upon my rooms being beautiful. I can't abide ugliness in factories. In we go then. But do be careful, my dear children. Don't lose your heads. Don't get overexcited. Keep very calm. Mr. Wonka opened the door. 5 children and 9 grown-ups pushed their way in, and oh, what an amazing sight there was now met their eyes. They were looking down upon a lovely valley. There were green meadows on either side of the valley, and along the bottom of it there flowed a great brown river. What is more, there was a tremendous waterfall halfway along the river. A steep cliff went over which the water curled and rolled in a solid sheet, and then went crashing down into a boiling, churning whirlpool of froth and spray. Below the waterfall, and this was the most astonishing sight of all, a whole mass of enormous glass pipes were dangling down into the river from somewhere high up in the ceiling. They really were enormous, these pipes. There must have been a dozen of them at least, and they were sucking up the brownish muddy water from the river and carrying it away to goodness knows where. And because they were made of glass, you could see the liquid flowing and bubbling inside them. And above the noise of the waterfall, you could hear the never-ending sucking sound of the pipes that did their work. Grace trees and bushes were growing along the river banks, weeping willows and alders and tall clumps of rhododendrons with their pink and red and mauve blossoms. In the meadow there were thousands of buttercups. There, cried Mr. Wonka, dancing up and down and pointing his gold-topped cane at the great brown river. It's all chocolate. Every drop of that river is hot melted chocolate of the finest quality, the very finest quality. There's enough chocolate in there to fill every bathtub in the entire country, and all the swimming pools as well. Isn't it terrific? Just look at my pipes. They suck up the chocolate and carry it to all the other rooms in the factory where it is needed. Thousands of gallons an hour, my dear children. Thousands of gallons. The children and their parents were too flabbergasted to speak. They were staggered. They were dumbfounded. They were bewildered and dazzled. They were completely bowled over the hugeness of the whole thing. They simply stood and stared. The waterfall is the most important, Mr. Wonka went on. It mixes the chocolate, it churns it up, it pounds and beats it, it makes it light and frothy. No other factory in the world mixes its chocolate by waterfall, but it's the only way to do it properly. The only way. And do you like my trees? He cried, pointing with his stick. And my lovely bushes? Don't you think they look pretty? I told you I hated ugliness. And of course they are all eatable. All made of something different and delicious. And do you like my meadows? Do you like my grass and my buttercups? The grass you are standing on, my dear little ones, is made of a new kind of soft, minty sugar that I've just invented. I call it sludge. Try a blade. Please do. It's delectable. Automatically, everyone bent down and picked one blade of grass. Everybody, that is, except Augustus Gloop, who took a big handful. Violet Beauregard, before tasting her blade of grass, took the piece of world record-breaking chewing gum out of her mouth and stuck it behind her ear. Isn't it wonderful, Mr. Charlie? Hasn't it got a wonderful taste, Grandpa? I could eat the whole field, said Grandpa Joe, grinning with delight. I could go on all fours like a cow and eat every blade of grass in the field. Try Buttercup, cried Mr. Wonka. They're even nicer. Suddenly, the air was filled with screams of excitement. The screams came from Rosa Salt. She was pointing frantically to the other side of the river. Look! Look over there! She screamed. What is it? He's moving! He's walking! It's a little person! It's no man! Down there below the waterfall! Everyone stopped picking buttercups and stared across the river. She's right, Grandpa! Cried Charlie. It is a little man. Can you see him? I see him, Charlie, said Grandpa Joe excitedly. And now everyone started shouting at once. There's two of them! My gosh, so there is. There's more than two. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What are they doing? Where do they come from? Who are they? Children and parents alike rushed down to the edge of the river to get a closer look. Aren't they fantastic? No higher than my knee. Look at their funny long hair. The tiny men, they were no longer the medium-sized dolls, had stopped what they were doing, and now they stared back across the river at the visitors One of them pointed towards the children, and he whispered something to the other four, and all five of them burst into peals of laughter. But they can't be real people, Charlie said. Of course they're real people, Mr. Wonka answered. They're Oompa Loompas. Chapter 16, the Oompa Loompas. Oompa Loompas? And we said at once, Oompa Loompas! Imported direct from Loompa Land, said Mr. Wonka proudly. There's no such place, said Mrs. Salt. Excuse me, dear lady, but Mr. Wonka, cried Mrs. Salt. I'm a teacher of geography. Then you'll know all about it, said Mr. Wonka. And oh, what a terrible country it is. Nothing but thick jungles infested by the most dangerous species in the world. Hornswogglers and snozzwangers and those wicked terrible wangdoodles. A wangdoodle would eat 10 Oompa Loompas for breakfast and come galloping back for a second helping. When I went out there, I found the little Oompa Loompas living in tree houses. They had to live in tree houses to escape from the wangdoodles and the hornswogglers and the snozzwangers. And they were living on green caterpillars, and the caterpillars tasted revolting. And the Oompa Loompas spent every moment of their day climbing through the treetops, looking for other things to mash up with the caterpillars to make them taste better. Red beetles, for instance, and eucalyptus leaves, and the bark of the boom tree, all of them beastly, but not so quite beastly as the caterpillars. Poor little Oompa Loompas! The one food that they longed for more than anything else was the cacao bean, but they couldn't get it, and Oompa Loompa was lucky we found 3 or 4 of them a year. But oh, how they craved them! They used to dream about cacao beans all night and talk about them all day. You only had to mention the word cacao to an Oompa Loompa, and he would start dribbling at the mouth. The cacao bean, Mr. Wonka continued, which grows on the cacao tree, happens to be the thing from which all chocolate is made. You cannot make chocolate without the cacao bean. The cacao bean is chocolate. I myself use billions of cacao beans every week in this factory. And so, my dear children, as soon as I discovered that the Oompa Loompas were crazy about this particular food, I climbed up to the treehouse village and poked my head in through the door of the treehouse belonging to the leader of the tribe. The poor little fellow, looking thin and starved, was standing there trying to eat a bowl full of mashed up green caterpillars without being sick. Look here, I said, speaking English, not speaking English of course, but in Oompa Loompa-ish. Look here, if you and all your people will come back to my country and live in my factory, you'll have all the cacao beans you want. I've got mountains of them in my storehouses. You can even have cacao beans for every meal. You can gorge yourself silly on them. I'll even pay your wages in cacao beans if you wish. Do you really mean it? Asked the Oompa Loompa leader, leaping on his chair. Of course I mean it. And you can have chocolate as well. Chocolate is better than cacao beans because it's got milk and sugar. The little man gave a great whoop of joy and threw his bowl of mashed caterpillars right out of the treehouse window. It's a deal, he cried. Come on, let's go. So I shipped them all over here, every man, woman, and child in the Oompa Loompa tribe. It was easy. I smuggled them over in large packing cases with holes in them, and they all got here safely. They were wonderful workers. They all speak English now. They love dancing music. They are always making up songs. I expect you will hear a great deal of singing here from time to time. I must warn you, though, that they are rather mischievous. They like jokes. They still wear the same kind of clothes they wore in the jungle. They insist upon that. The men, as you can see for yourself across the river, wear only deerskins. The women wear leaves, and the children wear nothing at all. The women use fresh leaves every day. Daddy! Shouted Rosa Salt, the girl who got everything she wanted. Daddy, I want an Oompa Loompa. I want you to get me an Oompa Loompa. I want an Oompa Loompa right away. I want to take it home with me. Go on, Daddy, give me an Oompa Loompa. No, my pet, his father said to her. You must interrupt Mr. Wonka. But I want an Oompa Loompa, screamed Versa. All right. But I can't get one for you this second. Please be patient. I'll see you have one before the day's out. I'll guess this, shouted Mrs. Gloop. I'll guess this, dear sweetheart. I don't think you better do that. I'll guess this, Gloop, as you might have guessed, had quietly sneaked down to the edge of the river, and he was now keeling on the riverbank, scooping hot melted chocolate into his mouth as fast as he could. And we'll leave it right there. We'll continue from the next chapter next time.